welcome to this week's Riks Round Up by Riks Europe. My name is Hannah, and today I am joined by political commentators Elias Nordgren and Peter Kleppe. Welcome back.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you.
We have some interesting topics to talk about today. We will first talk about the EU that doubles down on climate policy ahead of UN climate summit in Brazil. Secondly, we will talk about the EU Commission that revises budget plan to avert rebellion. And lastly, we will talk about 10 of tens of thousands of Swedes that are involved in gang warfare. So no time to waste. Let's start to introduce the first topic. What can we say about it?
Well, there was this renowned climate summit in Brazil, which garnered a lot of headlines. Not usually, actually. Usually, these headlines are about what a great initiative this is, what a great opportunity for the world to gather around, a common sense of purpose for reducing emissions and stopping climate change. That's usually what happens at these meetings. However, these last few years, these climate summits have had a bit of a bad rap. I mean, we've had countries like the United States pulling out of the Paris Accord. We've had a number of other countries, including China, which I believe didn't participate at this particular summit. So these type of climate meetings have lost a lot of prestige lately, which is a bit of a new development. And I think it signals something that's positive ultimately particularly for the European economy, which has been ravaged obviously by green policies and the like. And although we have things that, like you mentioned, I mean, the EU is doubling down on many of its climate commitments. We're also seeing that in terms of real politics in Europe, there's been quite a reversal in many of these on the climate area on the on the topic of climate change. So we've had, for example, the ban on combustion engines that the EU has been debating for quite a while now. That goal has been postponed by several years, if it hasn't already been abolished. I'm not even sure actually where that's going. That's because obviously in Germany, a lot of major car manufacturers and other industries are very bothered by the policies that are being run by Brussels. And the situation is the same in many other European countries. So what this climate summit has boiled down to is essentially just a performative sort of like theater for world governments, or some governments at the very least, to sort of put up this play where they give each other a pat on their back and tell themselves what a good job they're doing to save the world. Whereas in real terms, you're not really seeing them commit to whatever they're agreeing at these summits. And a lot of people have seen through this charade, so to speak. For example, there was one famous incident now where the King of Sweden, who actually represented Sweden at this summit, questioned the necessity for Europe to have to contribute so much in monetary terms to these climate solutions. He sort of broke the unspoken rule that you're supposed to abide by at these global summits, where you don't question the agenda. Where he did it in a fairly innocuous way. You should remember that the King of Sweden is obviously he's not going to be leading the charge against the globalist New World Order or anything like that. But he made some fairly innocuous observations that Europe is paying a lot of money, is paying a lot of resources into this sort of climate reparations scheme that these summits have usually resulted in. And which could be considered quite unfair, considering the low percentage that Europe actually contributes when it comes to global emissions. Obviously, giants like the United States and China should be paying a lot more, but it's Europe that's footing the bill here. And this received quite a lot of attention actually. That the facade is actually cracking a little bit on this global climate nonsense, really, to be frank, that we're seeing here. And this might actually be one of the last of these meetings that is going to be widely publicized, I feel like, because there are so many reasons that various peoples in positions of government in Europe in particular, they have a lot of reasons to question whatever is happening at these climate summits. So we'll see what happens here. But so far, this climate summit has only received negative media attention, which is something that, again, it's very positive for the future of Europe.
Yeah, and I mean, it's great, Elias, to see the King of Sweden talking more sense than many European politicians. Because last week, European Union ministers, they agreed another climate target, this time by 2040. So it seems like it will never stop. You know, if you look at 2018, then Europeans thought in one opinion poll that climate change and environmental challenges were within the top two challenges for Europe. That's no longer the case. People worry about lots of other things, rightly so. Even if you think climate change is a major issue, perhaps it's a very complex, scientific debate. Almost nobody, if you look into the actual damage, will agree that this is worth to be a top priority, let alone damaging and destroying our industry, which European politicians are doing by the 2035 ban, which you mentioned, Elias, by the ETS climate taxation, which is driving up the price of energy to incredibly high levels for our chemical industry in Benelux, Germany, mostly also the UK, which is still aligning with this extreme, policy. And the fact that it's in Brazil, this climate summit is sort of laughable. I mean, last year it was in Azerbaijan, in Baku, which is famous for its fossil fuels exploration. Now, nothing wrong with fossil fuels; it's the bedrock of our civilization. But it's sort of bizarre to then have a sort of a UN climate summit hostile to fossil fuels hosted there. And the same is now in Brazil. You know, they do it in the middle of the rainforest in Belém, and they've been destroying a lot of forest for a new highway. To get all the international climate policy cabal, into the conference. And the BBC, for example, has been documenting this, has been interviewing local farmers that were complaining about this, are afraid that they'll have to move at some point because of all of this. Also, 75% of the CO2 emissions in Brazil are coming from agriculture. You know, it's a very important economic sector, and within agriculture, soy cultivation is very important. And if you look into soy cultivation, things are not heading the right way. This has been quite damaging for the environment in many respects. There was some kind of an arrangement, the Amazon soy arrangement, whereby everybody involved, industry, also NGOs, they sort of worked together for a long time, saying, look, let's at least not do it on land that is vulnerable to deforestation. In August, the authorities of Brazil, just before this climate summit, have decided to suspend this moratorium. So yeah, like when it comes to soy, one of their lead experts, Brazil is not exactly showing the way. So it should beg the question why such a summit should be hosted there. Then of course you have all the hypocrisy, of the EU signing up to something knowing that it hardly makes any difference. The United States is not even attending. China and India are sort of claiming that they do something, but the only thing they're doing is just to continue with more and more coal. And can you blame them? Because they also want to develop. So yeah, I think the whole thing is a complete farce.
That's very interesting. Let's go to our next topic. As we said in the beginning, the EU Commission makes some changes to its own long-term budget proposal to avoid rebellion. Please, could you tell us some more about this?
Well, yeah, so the European Union's budget runs over 7 years. So every 7 year they have to renegotiate how much money the European Union will be able to spend. And this is, of course, then a great fest of discussion between the member states, all the vested interests coming out of the woodwork, agricultural subsidy receivers, regional subsidy receivers, complaining that it's not enough, or complaining about the measures. Now, the European Commission, at the beginning of the summer, they came up with an extreme proposal to double the budget, and everybody was like, "What are you doing?" There is no support whatsoever for this, and despite this, the EU bureaucracy, came up with the proposal. They claim, yeah, it's not exactly doubling because we already sort of assume that the COVID recovery fund, which was a large pot of money on top of the regular 1,000 billion euro EU budget, the Commission said, well, we'll just we assume that this will be repeated, even if it was agreed that this would be a one-off. Now the COVID recovery fund has led to lots of waste. The European Court of Auditors has been very critical about the shadiness surrounding it. There's been documented examples of the mafia cashing in on the money. This is also happening with regular EU spending, with regional funds, of course, with agricultural funds. The gentleman who's now the Prime Minister of the Czech Republic, he has been indicted in the past for having collected agricultural funds in a shady manner. I'm not sure what the status of that lawsuit is, but you don't have to look very far to see that a lot of the money is not used optimally. So it's just bizarre to then propose to increase the budget. And if that wasn't enough, the European Commission also said, look, we don't only want to be able to spend more money, we also want taxation powers. We want a part of the corporate tax income that national governments collect, and we also want to tax tobacco, and we want a large part of the income from that also for our own healthcare budget, even if the European Union was not supposed to deal with healthcare in the first place. This is a core member state competence. Thankfully, a whole lot of governments, actually led by the Swedish government, has been fiercely resisting this, has been saying, look, we don't want you to get more own resources, as they call it. Also, if you look at the track record of the European Union, where they have been having a little bit of influence on health policy, it's not exactly positive, to put it mildly. A key part of the EU health policy has been to ban the famous Swedish product snus, which is for many people in Sweden an alternative for cigarettes that are of course terribly damaging to health. Now, Sweden has had this exception from the EU ban for 30 years. And if you now compare the cancer statistics in Sweden, or the statistics about diseases that are related to smoking cigarettes with those in other countries, the results are self-evident. So you could argue that if there had not been this EU ban on snus, we would have had a lot less people dying of smoking-related diseases over the years. So the last organization that should have any powers over health policy is, of course, the European Union. We should leave this to the member states that are making many mistakes already, often, and it's not always easy, obviously, to get it right. So let democratically elected governments decide this, please, and not the European Commission. So with this new budget, this is just yet another, excuse or sort of tool used by the EU to get more power, as they are always doing.
And lastly, tens of thousands of Swedes are involved in gang warfare. I mean, this is a big number. What did the Swedish Prime Minister say about this?
Well, I mean, people, that's usually how the reporting goes outside of Sweden. 10,000s of Swedes, these are not Swedes. Predominantly these are men of immigrant background, particularly Middle Eastern and or African migrant background. And these are obviously, as in most other European countries, or I suppose all European countries that have been afflicted by mass migration, these are the people that constitute this sort of like new crime wave that we've been experiencing in the 2010s and into the 2020s. Obviously, and the situation in Sweden is in many ways a lot worse than it is in many other countries due to a variety of complex influences that have led to us having, up to about 60,000 people, according to police estimations, that are actively part of this criminal sort of environment, but not necessarily criminals themselves. I believe that the police report that this news article was covering at this time was stated something in the area of 17,000 active people who are involved in criminal gangs, organized criminality, and who are essentially involved in all of these violent actions that we're seeing, and that's with bombings, with murders, shootings, all of these things. And the statement from the Swedish Prime Minister, which I'm actually not sure what the source is of, to be honest. I think this is something, a statement that has been circulated in Europe, that this is something that the Swedish Prime Minister has said. And this was probably, I believe that this was probably passed off as something, it's nothing, it's not a statement out of the ordinary to actually say that we cannot prosecute all of these tens of thousands of people as you would expect, perhaps, a state, as you would expect the rule of law to effectively do. The debate in Sweden about this sort of criminality has sort of bordered on the we need to think up new solutions on how to tackle this problem. But whereas outside of Europe, you don't really hear that type of rhetoric, because you don't have this massive amount of criminality that Sweden actually has. So I just want to point out that this statement is not necessarily a statement of doom and gloom from the Swedish Prime Minister in this case. There are other things that are that the Swedish government is looking at in order to handle this, all of these very violent criminals that are walking free in Sweden. But this is it's an interesting development, because when you see this type of reporting leaking out of Sweden into Europe, you can sort of see the contrast between how this topic of criminality and immigration is handled between countries. A lot of people are very upset about how could this happen to Sweden, whereas for many Swedes at this point, this is just a regular Tuesday, right? But when it comes to actually solving this problem that we have imported into Sweden with organized criminality of this sort, usually you find that there is a movement towards more radical solutions. We can't prosecute all of these people. Well, maybe some of these people can actually leave the country in various ways. Maybe some of these people can be prosecuted not necessarily for their criminal criminal activity, but they can be penalized by society in other ways, for example, having the police confiscate their illegally acquired goods in various fashions, even though they cannot prove that the goods were acquired illegally. If you have a car, for example, that the police have tax records that show that you cannot afford to drive around this car that you're driving around with, then the police can actually confiscate that car from you. And the same also goes for many other sort of items that you might be carrying, or even articles of clothing, that if the police deem you to not be able to afford any of these things naturally, they will act on you. And that's essentially the types of measures that Sweden is embracing right now. And many of these are very unfamiliar to many Swedes. It's very foreign to Swedish culture, actually, to have this type of legal enforcement. But, it's probably the only way out of this problem that we're seeing here. And I think that a lot of other European countries are going to be going down the same direction. It's just that they haven't had these problems amount to this, they haven't magnified to this degree yet. That's all. That's what I believe that the difference is here. We're building new prisons. We're employing, we're massively expanding policing in Sweden, and these are all very bad things. And I don't want a police state to be able to. We don't want to see the growth of a police state just to satiate the need to prosecute all of these people, when there are so many other things that we can actually do to get rid of them and secure peace on Swedish streets once again. And one of those things is also, aside from what I mentioned, remigration, of course. So that's the direction that we're heading in here. And it's very positive, at least, that the rest of Europe, that Sweden can serve as an example of what happens when you combine these often very sort of far left leaning policies in terms of how you approach crime and law and punishment with mass migration. So let Sweden be a lesson to all of Europe about what you shouldn't do with regards to these issues.
Well, with that said, I'm saying thank you so much, Elias and Peter, for your insights today.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Riks Europe.